Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining me on this session. Thanks a lot to Intigriti as well for organizing this. Thanks also for the nice shirt that they sent me to wear for this presentation. Um, I'm very glad to be here. Very glad to spend the next couple of minutes, I think about a half hour, talking about the basics of building your own bug bounty tool. Let me quickly start up by introducing myself. My name is Pieter. I am a security consultant. Have been working for a company 5 years when I came out of school, after which I went freelance and have been spending the last 3.5 years doing bug bounty pretty much full time. I am a occasional blogger, so do go and have a look at some of my articles that I've written on my blog, which is listed there. You can find me on Twitter, obviously, and you can find me on GitHub, which is relevant to what this presentation will be about. I am an amateur coder, so by no means do I consider myself a developer or a professional coder. However, I have built some small tools in the bug bounty sphere, which is why I've been asked to present on this topic. I want to note that I'll be telling a very personal story about developing bug bounty tools. That means so the challenges and the solutions that I talk about might not necessarily reflect the experience of other people trying to do the same thing. Or if you would try and develop something out of this meeting, out of this presentation, which would be really cool, it may very well be the case that you have very different ideas when you start developing your tool. But I do hope that some of the ideas and the pointers about this topic that I'll be presenting today can be a guideline or maybe even inspire you to start working on something that you've been thinking about for maybe a while already. Just what else is on this slide? You can see my Intigriti profile there. You can see a screenshot of my blog. There's my GitHub profile, which lists some of the repositories, some of the tools that I've been working on. And then there's 2 screenshots here. One is of the BBRF, Bug Bounty Reconnaissance Framework dashboard that I've created. And in the back there, you've got a post-message POC builder, which is a web page really that I use sometimes to build POCs for post-message vulnerabilities. These are 2 examples of the things that you can find on my GitHub profile. Okay, let's dive into it. So who am I trying to talk to during this presentation? So this talk is really intended for bug bounty hunters in the first place. Some development experience, I guess, is useful, although not required. This is very interesting, I hope, if you're looking for a challenge, if you want to contribute to the InfoSec community, which obviously is what this whole Lead Up Live is all about. The reasons why you might want to develop your own bug bounty tool, some ideas I've listed there is you might want to improve some of the things you're doing from day to day. Maybe you want to consolidate your findings in a way. So let's say you are making findings, but you don't know how to manage them. And you have an idea on how to do that with some custom tooling. That could be interesting. Maybe improve the efficiency of your testing if you're doing the same tests every day. Obviously, there's a room for automation, or there usually is room for automation. So that could be a good reason that you might want to do that. Or you might want to scale up your bug bounty business by professionalizing stuff and improving how you do things, really scale things up, get more findings, get more bounties. A couple of good reasons I think that you might want to invest time in customizing or building your own bug bounty tools. So let me talk to you about the process that I have figured works well for me. Usually it starts off something like this. You wake up one morning, you think, I've got a brilliant idea, but how should I go forward with this idea? So what happens in this phase, to me, it means you have to develop your ideas. And there's a couple of ways in which I find developing your ideas can be really useful. First of all, don't underestimate the power of pen and paper. Um, I mean, quite literally, for every code that I've ever written, I think there's a notebook somewhere with at least a couple of pages of diagrams and hard to read notes, just some ideas or sketches of what I believe my my thoughts or my ideas could look like when transformed into code. Some of these ideas that I've developed while I was traveling, in which case a notebook is really invaluable. It's really good to have something to jot down ideas when you're on the road. Other ideas I've worked on in an office, for example, with a whiteboard at my disposal, which is another great way to formulate thoughts to yourself. So scribbling away on a whiteboard that is available, absolutely recommend that. Then obviously, so sometimes you need some time. So writer block is not something that only happens to fiction writers, I don't think. Sometimes you just get stuck trying to develop your ideas, in which case I do recommend to take some time off. If you're traveling, that's a good idea anyway. You might want to enjoy your time while you're abroad. But if you're less lucky, stuck at home, I want to vouch for having a shower. Is where the best ideas spring from. Take a walk, cook a meal, take some off time regularly to develop your ideas. I think these have really helped me in kind of the path where I want to go more clear, going towards developing a first POC. So the next question is, okay, so I've got all these ideas. How do I transform these ideas into code? Basically, this boils down to the question, how do I create my first proof of concept? I've listed a couple of things on this slide. I think it's often useful to select one or a few features to focus on. So if you've got a whole idea for a tool that you're building, if you're creating a proof of concept, I think there's value in creating a working proof of concept quickly, which means you probably won't have the time or you won't want to invest all the time to go all in and to develop all the features that you've thought about and all the improvements that you can think of, which is why you can select one or a few features to focus on if you're building your proof of concept. Second advice is don't be scared to do it all wrong. I do believe that it's worth getting something written which you might not be happy about after you've done it, as long as you have done it, have developed something, have invested the time to start creating a proof of concept. In my case, so when I developed a BBRF framework, I believe I did 2 iterations that ended up completely different from the end result that I ended up publishing. But it did help me to kind of figure out what I wanted and to figure out how I wanted to do it. I would recommend writing in the language you know. If you're fluent in the language, that's one less thing to worry about when you're creating a POC. Otherwise, use Python. Everybody loves Python. And use Google abundantly. Even if I know a language, I usually code in Python. I'm not a Python developer, so I'm not very familiar with it, which is why Google is always a good idea. I use Google a lot just to figure out ways to write things. Incidentally, when you are Googling how to write code, you will stumble upon code snippets that do exactly what you want to try. So steal code proudly. Obviously, when you do that, credit the authors if you end up publishing, and make sure you check the licensing of the code that you're stealing to make sure you won't get into trouble down the road. But stealing code can save you some time, especially for a POC. Like I said, you wanna get a POC quickly to see if your idea works in practice. Obviously, you have spent some time developing your ideas in your notebook or in your written notes. So do refer to those when you are stuck writing your POC. For example, way I approached my my second or third iteration when building BBRF was I actually wrote down in a notebook what I would like my syntax to look like. So for example, I would write, okay, so I want to run sublister, which already exists, and I want to be able to pipe it into my tool and run scenario 1, for example, on that input. So I would write, okay, without actually knowing how I'm going to implement this is how I want to use my tool. This is the syntax that I want to use. And you can start from this to actually start implementing your tool, your actual code. One way for me that worked well doing this is to make use of docopt, which is a client or a command line interface documentation language. It really allows you to kind of use documentation of the syntax that you want, and it will actually parse that and allow you to really start implementing quickly the command line commands that you want to use. So I do recommend looking at docopt, very nice library if you're coding in Python. I think also available in other languages. 2 final thoughts about creating a first POC. So speed is not always a hard requirement. Often people will get stuck trying to optimize something that they're trying to do. But want to keep in mind what your objectives are. And do consider if speed is as important as you think it is. Sometimes it might not be. So for example, again, I'll be talking about BBRF from time to time as an example. But there is a very slow bottleneck because it talks HTTP to a server where it stores some data, and HTTP for a lot of data is famously slow. However, it's not an issue for the objectives of the tool because the main objectives are input, output, and to only do it once at the beginning of a whole process and once at the end of a whole process. So HTTP speed is not really, it is a bottleneck, but not really if there's a lot of things going on before and after that. So speed, not always as important as you think. So don't hold back in trying to create something that works. Again, we're talking about a proof of concept. If it means that it might not be optimum or optimized. Similarly, you want to keep input output simple. This kind of boils down to the Unix principle of writing code. I'm a big advocate of just creating something that can be chained with other tooling. So for example, to take the output of a sublister command as the input to your command, and similarly the output of the my tool in this example. You might want to consider keeping that very simple so we can pipe it again into a next tool. So that's the first proof of concept. This could take a while, but I think there's value in trying to minimize the time of creating your first proof of concept, which means keep things simple, select a feature to work on. Don't care too much about optimizing or being the best possible code that you can write. Here's a slide about some quick wins when writing your first proof of concept. Very much depending on what you're looking to write. There are some ways that you can make some quick progress. For example, if you are working on an idea that would involve creating a burp suite extension, this is actually very straightforward. It's not tricky at all to create a burp suite extension, especially if you get used to VS Code and Gradle. I found a very good article online from Crypto Gangsta that I read in November. It's already an article from a bit longer ago, from December 2019, where he explains how to set up VS Code to really make writing a burp extension easy. And I do have to say, I was able to write a single Java file with the extension logic in it. And then using a hotkey, just pressing Ctrl-B for building, would generate the fat jar file that you can import in directly into burp when using it as an extension, allowing you to use it immediately. So this is a very nice way to make quick progress when your POC is something you want to build inside of Burp Suite. Other ways that you might make quick progress, if they work for you, is by leveraging existing frameworks. For example, there's Nuclei from Project Discovery. I think everybody has heard about that. But if your ID works with sending HTTP requests and then parsing the response from those HTTP requests, then maybe Nuclei is a good way to look into to see if you can quickly create a working proof of concept that achieves what you wanna do. Other ways to make quick progress without having to reinvent everything yourself would be to find a tool that already does something similar to what you're trying to do, and to just start editing the code until it does precisely what you're looking for. So there's a couple of ideas to just quickly make some progress when writing your own POC. So that's everything for a first proof of concept. I already talked about how you'll likely need a couple iterations. So how do you continue when your proof of concept is done? You've used it for a while, and you want to start improving or extending what you've got already. For me, in my case, actually didn't stop after a second proof of concept. I had to create two before I found, or before all the puzzle pieces fit together, and I knew exactly how I wanted to build my final working tool or architecture. So some of the things that you want to try if you are improving something that you've built in a first iteration is to listen to yourself as a first user. So you've been using your first proof of concept for a while. You know exactly what you're looking for. You know exactly what you want to change now. So this is already very useful feedback to see how you want to improve stuff for yourself. Also, there will likely be a lot of lessons learned to improve your design or your architecture. Again, depending very much on what you're building. But for sure, you will find some, or you will have learned something from the way that you wrote the first iteration that will allow you to improve on the second iteration. And this is maybe a hard one to swallow, but it's not necessarily intended to be, which is, you can start from scratch if you need to, and often it will allow you to kind of steer clear from ways that you did the first time that maybe aren't ideal. But in some cases, it really is necessary. For example, the first time I built my BBRF, again, proof of concept, I wrote it all in the Python Django framework, which eventually turned out to be not as flexible as I wanted it to be. So I had to start from scratch, and eventually I ended up writing everything in Python again. Who knows? Maybe I'll take some time in the next iteration to learn, maybe some Golang and rewrite the whole framework in a fourth or another iteration. But starting from scratch can be useful depending on what you want to improve. If we're talking about extending features, again, take your notebook that you've been scribbling in religiously over the last weeks or months by now, and you'll have written down a lot of features, some thoughts that maybe you've already forgotten by now, and if you flick through them again, you'll find some features that maybe you're worth extending or adding now. That could be nice in a second iteration. And again, listen to the new ideas that you figured out by being the first user of this new tool when you use it for the first time. And then again, don't be scared to do it all wrong again. Like I said, it takes some time to figure out new things to learn, new things that you can use to build the ideal solution, or to really finally get where you want to be. In my case, it also helped. I did not put this on a slide, but it also helped to kind of read up on new technologies. So in the end, I ended up playing with a technology that I was not familiar with before, which was the CouchDB project, which was a file-based database format, JSON-based database format. I knew nothing about it. So what I did was I combined my off time with actual working time, or thinking about the developing of this idea, by looking for podcasts that discussed this technology, which was, not fairly broadly used. And I listened to some people talk about it. I listened to them explain some concepts that were unique to this technology. And this really helped me kind of understand and start to fit things in my mind to that I did end up using in the next iteration. So yeah, don't be scared to do it all wrong again. Feel free to start from scratch if needed. Just make sure that you listen to your own ideas and to incorporate those in the next try. Okay, so congratulations. You've now built a proof of concept that you are happy with. Maybe you've had to build two iterations, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe you're at number 10. Hopefully you aren't. But in the end, you think, okay, this is nice. I like using this. I'm comfortable using this. It's actually useful. I now want to share this with more people. How should you go about that? And there's a couple of things that I've learned. The first one being you want to publish a repository, and the usual choice there is GitHub. Maybe get to know Git if you're not very familiar with Git already. Create a repository, write some documentation. Really is key if you want people to adopt the work that you have put into building your new bug bounty tool. You'll want to write documentation. First of all, you want to have installation instructions because somebody needs to be able to install what you've built before they can start using it. But also, I find that it's useful to list some known issues on the GitHub page for a simple reason that if people notice things that don't work, which were not documented, they might steer clear from your tool. Whereas if they read up front that something that they'll want to try is not possible, at least they might give you some slack and continue to use it. Maybe even contribute to the project if they like it. Also, a help flag goes a long way. If it's a command line tool, make sure you implement a help command because that's often what people will try if they want to figure out something or figure out how something works. Version numbers to help troubleshooting. Still today, a lot of the feedback I get is if something isn't working, my first question I've learned to ask is, what version of, in this case, BBRF are you using? And if they say anything below the current version, I'll tell them, hold on, you have to upgrade first. After that, we can start troubleshooting. In some cases, that resolves the issue, in which case I'm a happy man. In other cases, we'll actually find another bug. But the version number is pretty useful in ensuring that we find exactly what's going wrong. The next one, or the next two, are a bit more like suggestions. Is consider using a package manager to make the life of your users easier. In my case, I wrote something in Python. I ended up using PyP or PyPy for Python. So that the user can actually just use pip install and then the name of your tool. For me, this was kind of scary at first because I was not familiar at all with packaging of Python modules. But in the end, it wasn't, there's a bit of a learning curve. You kind of need to understand how this works. But in the end, it's not very complex. And it really makes it a lot easier, not only for other people using my tools, but also for myself. If I spin up a new virtual private server somewhere and I want to install my tools, I just type, make sure Python and pip are installed, and then I can install and upgrade to the latest versions of my own tools, regardless of where I'm working. It really makes it a lot easier. And it also will help you in your installation instructions to kind of be concise. Another consideration you might want to try is to use Docker if you have built something that requires kind of a complicated setup. One example is I've made kind of a Wilson Cloud Responder, which is a online server that logs DNS and HTTP requests. In this case, you need to have a server running. You need to have HTTP server, a DNS server, etc. It needs some Python scripts to log things to a Slack channel. This is kind of a lot of moving parts that in the end I compiled into a Docker with Docker Compose. It's now kind of a single instruction or a single command to get the whole setup working and to get everything spun up, as it were. So Docker, again, if you're not familiar with it, it takes a bit of learning. If you are familiar with it, you'll know that it's not really that difficult to make something like this work. So very much like that, if your setup allows it. And then finally, you're publishing your work. You want to showcase what you've done. If your work or your tool has something with a front-facing web application, consider hosting a demo or a public instance somewhere on your website, somewhere in a free hosting environment like Netlify. For example, I've got a BBRF dashboard that is just spun up on Netlify. It doesn't cost me anything. The source code is public. And anytime I make any changes, it just automatically publishes the newest version online. And it's available for public. It's a good way to showcase something. People that want to have a look don't have to install anything. So it's a kind of a nice way to gain traction, maybe, if you're looking to build an audience. Screenshots there are just some documentation of the GitHub projects that I have on my account. If you like Markdown, you'll have a lot of fun writing documentation on GitHub. Okay, so that's everything about how to publish your first bug bounty tool. Next question is, how do I keep this up? How can I make sure that what I've written can stand the test of time? How can I sure this can still be used? How can I make sure this is still used, 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line? So a first challenge for me was actually getting to my user base. When I first published my final version of the tool that I wrote, I actually had no idea who was using it, if people liked it, what their thoughts about it were at all. So one way that I did find out some information about my users was by means of Twitter polls. This was at the time that I wanted to write a burp extension that integrated with the BBRF tool that I wrote. So I turned to Twitter. I had no idea if anybody was using it, if anybody would be interested in using this. So I wrote this poll: would anybody appreciate, or would you use it if I wrote this? And there were 4 answers there to test kind of if people who saw the tweet were using the tool or not. So for me, this was the first time that I understood that 40 people were actually using the tool that I wrote, which was actually very surprising and very, very interesting to hear. It was the first time that I knew that people were actually using something that I wrote, which is a very nice feeling. A second way to understand what people are thinking is by means of GitHub issues. So once more and more people are picking up the tool that you wrote, you'll see that any issues that still exist, and trust me, there will be some issues, people will start logging these issues on GitHub, and you'll actually see, based on those GitHub issues, that people are using your tool. So this was kind of a first or two ways for me to understand if and how many people were using it. Another problem that was tough for me and still is today is the typical open source problems, right? There's open source software challenges that include maintenance, support, and bug fixes. If it's a one-man project, one-person project, it'll take a lot of time fixing bugs when they exist. So there is some value in trying to build a community around what you've made and to encourage contributions to the code or the documentation to ensure that you don't have to do all the work yourself. When this happens, also very interesting. I've seen some pull requests on my project. It's always very cool to see that people are taking matters into their own hands and actually helping out by writing some code to improve a feature or to add a feature. A addition that I wanted to list here is kind of an improvement to maximize interaction or people using your tool, if you're building one, is to aim for a maximum coverage of ecosystems, by which I mean, depending on it, of course, it depends on what you're writing, but if you're writing a command line tool, make sure it's compatible with Windows and Linux and Mac. that already triples your user base, because it's very annoying to try to start using a tool and realize it's not working on your system. If you're building something that can integrate with Burp Suite, why not? In Bug Bounty world, there's a lot of people using Burp. For sure, you'll have some extra users if you provide a way to integrate what you're doing with Burp Suite. And finally, there's some value. I already touched upon this. If you're building something that can work with a web dashboard, we're still people. We still like looking at nice graphics, nice numbers and colors. So maybe a web dashboard can also help you out to kind of get more people using your tool. That concludes it for me. I've listed some final closing thoughts. First of all, the Bug Bounty community is a lot of fun. So giving back to the community is really an amazing feeling. So do please try to build that thought, or to kind of develop the thoughts you have, the ideas you have for a Bug Bounty, a new Bug Bounty tool. Try to publish it. Try to see or motivate people to start using it. It is a very fun feeling, and there is always room for more tools in the Bug Bounty space. That concludes everything for me. Thanks very much for watching. I will be available on Slack for some Q&A if there's any from the audience. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest. Thank you. Bye.